Hello and welcome back to Century Guild Salon. I'm Kat Handler, I'm your host, and welcome to those joining us live. And if you're watching this after the fact, welcome to you as well. I am going to introduce Thomas Negovan. Hello, Thomas.
That was a joke. My microphone actually
it completely fell flat because you stalled.
There's probably no one in here yet.
Oh, we've got some people in here. Hi, everyone.
What'd you say?
I said, hi, everyone. So tonight we are going to be discussing the art of Der Orchid Garden. If you're unfamiliar with Der Orchid Garden, it was a fantasy and horror magazine published in Germany from 1919 through 1921. And it was published with short stories alongside really, really cool artwork. A lot of them period expressionist artworks and some more historical artworks. And we are going to be covering some of the material from this series. Thomas.
Yes.
Tom. It's so weird calling you Thomas.
So the thing that we had originally planned to do tonight was to pick. Kat had the idea of picking like the 10 strangest stories and then the 10 most horrific. And there's so many great stories in there that, because they come from this European tradition, are very alien to what we might have grown up with, just in America. And so in preparing for it, and this really is something that just happened in the last 24 hours, I was remembering that if I'm just telling you, here's what I think, and I do that for an hour, then it's just like a lecture. And that's probably better served as a pre-recorded video, because then it can be edited to be succinct. We can also put images up that go along with what specifically I'm saying. And the whole idea originally for this was that we create a salon kind of environment. We've done 60 Kickstarters at this point. We've had a gallery for 20 years. We've put out all of these books, that there are always so many random fragments that you can only discuss in a live setting. So instead of doing that top 10 thing tonight, we are going to do it, but we're going to do that as a pre-recorded video. And then maybe after can do some kind of discussion about it. But the big thing tonight is that I think what I'd like to do is really open up the floor to the kinds of things that anyone here wants to talk about. The other thing is that we're going to be doing a lot of overhaul with our website and with the antique business and publishing and stuff over the next 3 months. And part of it is going to be making the things that happen on our presence here, whether it's social media or online or being live and present, that's going to get changed a lot too. And so part of that is going to be tonight and probably next month being a little bit experimental to just kind of see what things do people want to know about? What do you want to hear us talking about? Yeah. And so, I guess, so the first thing is there's obviously a lot of things that are happening right now. We've got the paperback of Le Pater, which is some of you have already. The new version of Berlin Girls will be in people's hands in probably about 4 weeks. Of course, there is Orchid Garden. We're running the Kickstarter right now for the 8th and final book in the series. That's exciting. Funnily enough, that'll probably be in people's hands about the same time as Berlin Girls. Berlin Girls we print overseas. Orchid Garden we print in the United States. So there's a shorter production time for those paperbacks. And then, of course, there's the movie things like the Caligula restoration and then the Caligula book that's coming out. I'm told that Berlin Girls will be shipping in July. What month is it now? It's May, June, July, it's 5-6 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. China is definitely having lockdowns and delays far beyond what we've experienced here. I was talking to the person who does the press proofing there, and it's random things like, oh yeah, we're not coming into work for a week because everybody has to stay home. So it's still, the global supply chain situation is still extremely compromised. But everything is moving forward, and that's what's important. So
I'll interject for a moment. I just, if this is your first time joining our salon this evening, normally what we do is we get on a topic, we start talking about it, Tom gives some background, and we do leave plenty of opportunity for covering questions, kind of getting more into the, like Tom was saying, the discussion format. So I just wanted to encourage you all, if you have, like he was saying, if you have thoughts about something that you wanted to learn more about, or if you hear us mention something and you have any questions about it or comments about it, please leave a comment. And this is just meant to be a community discussion.
Yeah, the thing is, we started doing these as kind of a replacement for the gallery experience, especially when everything was shut down. And so one of the things that I'm remembering is when you're talking to people in a space, you can see them looking at an Italian Art Nouveau poster. And so it's very easy to say, oh, let me tell you about that. Or, the show that's up on the wall or things like that. So like I said, this one and probably the next one, I think will be a little bit kind of a learning curve for us. We're committed to doing these, but we want to find ways to escalate what we're doing in a more meaningful way. I mean, I guess, I'll ask this. I'll ask a question. Cat handler.
I'm ready.
You've been completely immersed in the world of Art Nouveau and Expressionism and symbolism now in a kind of museum level way for a substantial handful of years. What do you feel is different about your perception of art in general compared to when you kind of liked it as maybe a lay person before you got so steeped in the academia?
The first thing that comes to mind is how much this material informs the things that I was interested in, let's say as a younger adult or a teen. As somebody who was interested in art from a young age.
Kick the table, sorry.
It's, perfect example would be how artists like musicians will take from the Weimar era.
Yeah.
And I know you've made that connection before, but another great example is German Expressionism and how much that has informed so much of an aesthetic that we're still seeing today. And so it really, it's kind of like you eat a delicious dish and you're not really sure what makes it so delicious. And then when you cook it, you recognize all of the components that work together to make it
Yeah.
to make it something really special and really outstanding. And I think that has been similar to my experience in learning about Art Nouveau, in going back and broadening my understanding of it. I hope that answers the question.
It does. It's so funny because when we were talking last week, I was thinking about, because Elias Marriage as a director, he made Shadow the Vampire, if anyone wasn't here last week. Did we even post that video from last week, or is it auto post?
We do post them after every one. They go up automatically.
Okay.
So
It's been a crazy. The thing I was going to say is, so when I talked to Elias, it was very funny speaking to him kind of on camera, because normally I'm just trying to make him laugh, and so it's very funny because you are normally just so absurd all the time. Hearing you trying to give a professional sounding answer was very, like, I thought you were going to talk about, I remember when I was listening to Marilyn Manson and
I'd like that
vomiting
to
in the
be
back of a car at 15. I don't know, whatever stories you would tell. But so something that used to happen a lot when we did San Diego Comic-Con the first time, so many people came up and were pointing to things and asking, "Oh, are you the artist?" And it's because there were so many elements of things that were on the walls that people could identify with as being things that had been borrowed for contemporary purposes. And there were, it used to be a very common thing. I mean, I now I try to do it with the books that we publish, but I remember, God, 15, 20 years ago, making little soft cover, just slip-cased, not slip-cased, but like, the sleeves of Le Pater for people, like comic book artists like Adam Hughes and stuff, just because it was work they'd see in our booth lose their mind over. I used to, I mean, I don't want to name drop a laundry list, but I definitely used to send stuff to directors and comic artists all the time, because I'd be flipping through some book from 1902 and see the most incredible statuary or things like that. And it's funny because you look at a lot of movies, like a really, really crazy one is The Chronicles of Riddick, the Vin Diesel movie. It's all Darmstadt statuary. It's all Darmstadt. But no one's looking at that except for me, thinking that's Darmstadt 1901. But it is. But it works because it's so futuristic and otherworldly that it works. And then, so Chandra just messaged me about, okay, are we doing more Berlin Girls books? The short answer is yes. The reason that we do those is because I like doing books like Le Pater, because they're filled with meaningful things that I'm thinking about, like on a daily basis. And then the thing that happens with a lot of art, and the Berlin Girls books are a really good example. There's some times where there's just great, maybe it's a magazine that has a couple artworks in it that are like pinup artworks, or the other books that we've done, like the books that are kind of the collected posters, like Infernal Creatures, where it's just, there's bizarre posters and there's not really a context to put them in academically beyond just the collection itself being strange or interesting. And so with the Berlin Girls stuff, I mean, there's some French illustrations from the period that are amazing. And there's so much that came out of Germany in between, say, 1918 and 1929 that is, we could do Berlin Girl books every year for the rest of my life. And there's so much stuff. So the answer is yes, we're going to do Berlin Girls books. But the other part is that I really, really do want to do a couple books, and we will across the next 18 months, that are a little bit narrower in terms of some elements. Like I'd like to do one that relates really more specifically to the cabaret artists in that era. There's a lot with sexuality and gender identity. And Berlin and the Weimar Republic was very acceptable to be openly gay or lesbian. And a lot of the artworks reflect that. And as the Nazis came into power, that's why by 1929 all of it had kind of disappeared. But from 1919 to 1921, for sure, there's so much of that that's really, really interesting, even in the cinema posters and things like that. So we'll keep doing Berlin Girls books, but I also really want to do something that's a little bit, not a little, a lot more of a deep dive, like Le Pater with that era. We'll definitely be doing a Grand Guignol book. That's one like Le Pater that I've been collecting for 20 years at this point. And there just reaches a point where you have to say, like, at what point do you just do it? I don't know that there's much more that I shouldn't say that. There's always more that you can learn, but I'm not finding new things or learning things at such a rate that would warrant waiting another 10 years or something. So that's kind of the big one for me that I'm excited about. And then, of course, Ilse, which Kat has been diligently supervising all the restoration work on. And so if you're a fan of Le Pater, the really beautiful symbolist Art Nouveau elements, I almost feel like Mucha was kind of dabbling with it in Ilse. A lot of the elements are there. They're not connected to a tight narrative the way Le Pater is, because Le Pater was literally from beginning to end, in the inception to completion was completely his vision, whereas this one was kind of like he was Eddie Van Halen playing a guitar solo on Beat It. You know what I mean? It was someone else's story. It's kind of fluff. But he took this 14th, 15th century fairy tale and just started sneaking things in that honestly had no reason to be there. It didn't make any sense beyond the fact that he was making it his own and making it very, very strange.
Yeah, the artworks are so, I mean, they're so quintessentially Mucha, but they're so, I don't know what, I mean, they're very ornamental, and they do have a lot of really cool metaphysical imagery. But the thing that I love to see is, as far as lithography, they're very beautifully made. I mean, there are layers of
printed by Champenois. So it was printed by at the printing house that did his large posters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can tell the craftsmanship is, or the workmanship, I should say, is beautiful, because like I'm looking at these at such a large blown up size, and I mean, you can just see down to.
Well, that's why they're $15,000 for an original book, is that they're works of art. That was something that happened a lot in publishing at the turn of the century, is that there was no I shouldn't say no, let me rephrase that. In the way that people now view books as kind of disposable, that did exist at the turn of the century. But in a realm where movies were new, there was certainly no radio. Books were more comparable to the cinematic experience or something like that. I'm trying to think of a modern. I think the idea is that it was just so respected. The way that people would do it is you'd buy the books and they would come like in a paper binding, and you would have your personal binder that you took it to. And maybe they did a simple cover. Maybe they did a beautiful, elaborate leather cover. Maybe you kept yours in the paper. But really, the act of reading and taking time and just contemplating even the paper that it was printed on was so important. And so the thing that you're experiencing when you're looking at these blown up to 800% are the things that people would have made their experiences in those days, you know. So it's kind of funny. Yes, you will be an expert in a very, very narrow point of field by the time this is done. So someone is asking about the Orchid Garden stories. The thing that is most notable to me about the Orchid Garden is that they reprinted authors like Edgar Allan Poe, for example, and really helped bring him into German pop culture, things like that. The thing to me that's most interesting is there's a really unique blend of horror and humor and futurism that doesn't exist really anywhere else in literature than Europe at the start of the 20th century. And so the Orchid Garden was really the culmination of that. And when you look at things like Weird Tales, which is the American, like the seminal pulp, it's the American things are a little more adventure based. They're a little more, I think, just because we grew up in America, they make sense to us in what we think of. And so just a couple of the stories. And this is one that I've mentioned before, so forgive me if you've heard about this one, but to me, this is just one of the funniest ones, is that it's a bunch of gentlemen sitting at a table, and they're each one after the other talking about what would be the most grotesque or magnificent way to die. And they're trying to outdo each other. It's almost like Jackass. They're trying to outdo each other with how morbid they could imagine. And then in the course of the dinner, one of them literally falls over and dies on the spot. And everyone at the dinner table just basically looks at him and in kind of silent applause, like, well, that was the best way to die. And the fact that even me saying that doesn't sound like there's a big punchline there. The fact that they devoted all of those words and all of that paper to something that's like such a flat joke and it's just weird. It's just strange. It's literally Weird Tales. But it's so weird that it just shows a difference in thinking. There are also a lot of stories that would make great movies. I've actually had people ask me, to comb through and send some of those. I've been fortunate enough to get paid to do some of that. And there are some where, like I'm trying to think of a good one. There's some that are just like really, I'm going to say this because this is kind of a traditional one, where there's a mirror. This young couple stays in this inn, and there's a mirror, and the mirror winds up, I'm going to get this totally wrong because I haven't read it in so long, but the mirror winds up kind of being this dimensional portal, and this kind of ghostly spirit thing comes in the room and interacts with the man. And it sounds like the premise of a great horror story or horror film or something like that, or short, maybe an episode. And it's just something that's never been reprinted in English. It's not anywhere. I'm hesitant as I'm talking about this because I realize, embarrassingly, that it's been so long since I've read some of these that if I'm correct in my memory of it. Wait, let me interrupt just to say this. The thing I'm concerned about is I'm going to mix up the beginning of one and the ending of another, and then this will be on the internet forever. And so I So I'm sorry I didn't really answer your question, but if you don't have the Orchid Garden books, definitely grab one because every one has lots of stuff. What were you going to say? And then you just reread all these in preparation for tonight. Why don't you quickly tell one of your... What was one of the ones you thought was the most disturbing?
The way I was thinking about the word horrific was, what are some of the worst things I could imagine as far as myself being in that scenario? And one of them just that I keep coming back to is called Maritza. And I'm so sorry, and I've forgotten the name of the author offhand, but it's in the Orchid Garden book. There's a young woman and her partner, her husband. They're at some sort of event, and he sees her interacting with this. I think it's a publisher, and she's smiling and laughing at him, and the story narrates his burning jealousy, and he knows.
Let me interrupt you to just say it's like the ultimate incel story. The guy is a suffering poet that's in love with this woman, and it's like the ultimate white knight story about like that he's just so in love with her, and he sees her interacting with this other man that is someone that he's trying to impress. And then they wind up, something happens where she has a letter that she's writing to this guy. And now I'll let you take over, but just, so what happens next?
Well, he sees her with a piece of paper laughing with this guy, and he's thinking, oh my God, this is a love note and they're humiliating me. And and so he goes to her room later that evening and he strangles her to death. And then out of the pocket of her breast falls this piece of paper, and it's one of his poems. And to his horror, he realizes that she had been presenting it to the publisher, trying to champion his work. And so it was, I mean, talk about horrifying.
Yeah, and there were other ones I thought were more horrifying. That one to me, I just thought, yeah, that's bad communication skills, is what that's what I thought when I read that.
That can be horrifying, Thomas.
Yeah.
The cool thing about that
story is in this one, and it's by Jeffrey Sefton.
Thank you.
Chandra brought that into me. I didn't know. I have to give credit for that.
Thank you. And the mirror story is, the mirror is reflecting a scene that had taken place in front of it before.
That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
The green mirror, is that what it's called?
I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure.
Oh my God. I mean, that's the other thing too, is we've been working on this thing for 3 years now. There's so many stories. And it's crazy that the last book is imminent, after all this time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to believe that last one's coming. I really love the very bizarre ones too, and I won't get too far into it because this will be better pre-recorded. But there's one that I have mentioned in a previous salon, and this is probably my favorite Orchid Garden story. It's called The Fattened Goose, and these guys have this machine that fattens geese, and they're experimenting with it, and one of them keeps making the mistake of making them too small, and then they disappear. And then one day, one of the guys comes back to find out that his partner had made it so large that it was like a King Kong sized goose just traipsing through the town.
I mean, that's the thing about the story is that it's that weird blend of science fiction and horror and the absurd, which, it's a monster rampaging through the streets, but it's a giant goose. So it's really, it's very bizarre. Someone asked a question about Elias doing a recorded version of his novel. What novel are you referring to? It's so weird when also too when you've got like names like The Mystery of Perception. I don't know who you are. But yeah, what novel of Elias's are you referring to? Now I'm curious.
We can circle back.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the I don't know if anybody here has seen the Student of Prague. The thing that made me think of it is that someone's about to be doing a restoration of it. And I was thinking about how much the German stories from the period surrounding the Orchid Garden and preceding it were really responsible for the earliest landmarks of horror cinema. So, Student of Prague, the idea of a doppelganger, Nosferatu, kind of the seminal vampire film story. That's all Weimar Republic, and I was the one he mentioned in podcasts. I don't know how much of that I'm supposed to talk about, but yeah, he's been working on a novel for, God, it's hard to measure time with the pandemic, at least 3 years. And I know it's pretty close to being done. And I don't know. He's got a great voice for reading, so I would definitely love to hear him read something like that. It's entirely possible.
That'd be fantastic.
And
so you were talking about Student of Prague, Nosferatu, seminal vampire film.
Well, I was just thinking about how one of the things, I've always looked at Art Nouveau as being an influence on all of this fantasy and you can't go to the movies without seeing all of this Art Nouveau symbolism, arts and crafts kind of aesthetic. Lord of the Rings is all, Celtic, Art Nouveau. And I was just thinking about how it's almost a richer ground to look at the Weimar era. And I think that anybody who is really in a creative position does know that. Like you will never hear an interview with someone like a Tim Burton or a Guillermo del Toro or anybody in that world that isn't incredibly well educated in the art and culture of that era. And so I guess I just was thinking that in terms of the Orchid Garden stories as being that, yeah, one of the biggest parts of it for me is just that there's such a different psychology. And Tim Burton's kind of a good example, like the idea of taking elements of absurdity and finding ways to mix it with horror in a way that makes something different. Like Edward Scissorhands is a great example. That is such an Orchid Garden type of story.
Yes, and very informed by Expressionism.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, visually for sure. But I'm just thinking like the scientist up on the hill and the kid, all of that. It's a very, very Orchid Garden story.
I mean, I could see a drawing by like Lynn Kogel of him, and he's got like his even the hands are Expressionist.
Did you ever think you'd be name dropping artists like Otto Lynn Kogel? Did you? I wonder what he would think. That's the other thing, is a lot of the illustrators in these books didn't really go on to do much else or become famous. Like I can't think of really anyone except for maybe is it, I don't know if it's Jean Mammon or her sister that did some work, but yeah, most of the works that are in here are by artists that went on kind of to other fields that were art adjacent. But it wasn't like a lot of periodicals, you'll see something and maybe there's an illustration. It's like, oh, you look at the name and it's Gustav Klimt or
Yeah.
something. But a lot of these artists, it really deviated. They either kind of, I don't want to say disappeared, but like left that world of art and illustration, or they got massive promotions as they moved up in the Third Reich kind of hierarchy of visuals. And but the advent of the Third Reich and everything that happened in Germany at that time, like really, really heavily affected the ability for artists to create liberally. You know, like it's like when people talk about cancel culture or things like that. Like the difference was at that time is people really were getting carted off. And it's you know, I've mentioned that in previous conversations. It's very distressing to be doing the research and to see that, oh, this person became very wealthy and successful and this person had to leave the country, you know? And so I think that the point I'm trying to make with that is I don't think it was just an internal decision that these people stopped their careers as illustrators. I think it was that the external forces became so increasingly volatile that it affected the entire culture of the creative community. Someone mentioned The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Ewers novel. I don't know if you've seen, is it, God, I'm drawing a blank. Is it Sidereal? No, it's not Sidereal Press. Someone's doing reprints of the Ewers novels. God, who is it? It's I'm looking this up only just because it's important. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sidereal Press. Sidereal Press does amazing work. Amazing work. So if you don't want to spend $300 or $400 to get an original copy, they're doing magnificent reprints of a lot of the work from Germany from this period. Definitely find their website. They're outstanding. If I could adapt an Orchid Garden story, which one would you choose? I mean, I think it would need to be like an anthology series, is the way that I've thought about it when I've tried to think about putting pitches together, just because most of the stories don't work if you think about it as like a 90-minute experience. I think they would get thin pretty quickly. There's not a lot of things interweaving. They're all meant to be succinct stories that they're kind of like little theater pieces. They're very connected to the Grand Guignol idea. They're very short. They're very brief. And I've also thought about this too. Like I can't say I won't change my mind, but I almost don't want to see them visually, because when you're reading them, or even just looking at the illustrations and reading a synopsis like we've done, I think that it falls into that thing of, it's kind of like why there haven't been a lot of great Lovecraft adaptations into film, is that your imagination is so good, you know? It's like someone asked Neil Gaiman on Facebook yesterday, are you thinking of doing a novelization of The Sandman now that it's going to be a Netflix series? And he said, no, because I want people to read the graphic novels. And I thought about that, and I agree completely. Like, if you take away the visuals of what he wrote and make it into this other thing, I feel like the Orchid Garden stories are kind of like that. They work as these really small, bizarre literary things. And so I'm grateful that we have them. And someone also mentioned that you'd like to see a collection of the best of these stories. And that is actually something that we've talked about. I would say there's like an 85% chance that we'll do that, just because of that reason, because there wasn't room. There's some of it where there's such great stories, and there wasn't room in our small books to do more than just a few passages. But there are some that are bizarre. Mr. Blackwell mentions Interview with the Vampire. I have to be honest, I couldn't get past the fake vampire teeth in that movie. I loved the books, but I've successfully completely blocked the movie out. So yeah, I guess maybe that is a really good example. And then yeah, Sean mentions Art Deco, Bauhaus, Fauvism, Futurism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all. I think I've told this story before, but like I remember I went over to Grant Morrison's apartment, and Gerard Way was there, and the two of them had up on the laptop some Boccioni drawings. Boccioni is an Italian futurist, and they were designing the Batmobile for a Batman story that they did for, I think it was it Black and White or something was the name of the comic. But I just was laughing. It's like when you're talking to people that are really talented, creative people, yeah, they know futurism. They know Boccioni. They know Dave McKean is another one that, like, you can't stump him on anything with all that. Well, no wonder his work is so good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, if anyone is watching this that is a creative person and you're not sure of what some of these things are that I'm mentioning, start with the isms, go to, futurism, symbolism, fauvism, and at the very least, just get, like a $20 book that's kind of the basic overview, and it'll change your mind about how you look at the world. Like the Fauvists are a great example. You had artists like Gustave Moreau that were doing really, really intense, hyper real Byzantine. And I say hyper real, but because they don't look real, but hyper detailed things of like, mythological moments. And then you had his students and that pendulum that swings. His students were looking at things like, well, what's more dreamlike than this? And then they were just kind of thinking, well, what if we just squeeze blue out of the tube and rub it all over the canvas? And so the kind of soft focus idea of the world being perceived just kind of in these really pure blocky elements is something that when I was younger, I was really disinterested in. And then when I understood that what they were pursuing was extremely metaphysical, then I started to be able to connect the art with the kind of the levels of exploration that you go through, when you're studying any kind of, whether it's your internal landscape or trying to make sense of the world or the larger ways that cultures interact with each other. And so, yeah, to kind of then follow up on what you said, Sean, is that the thing that I notice is kind of like Kat said when she started, that, bands and stuff that she was into, as she started to learn, she'd notice, that's where they got that. That's where they got that. That, it's just it's kind of like having a paint box. And like maybe when your first crayon kit's better. Your first crayon kit has 6 colors in it, right? Sorry. And then, you get the 24 pack. And one day you get the 60 pack. And then one day you get the 128 color pack. Like it keeps going through that. And that's all it does, is it just gives you more textures to work with, more gradations of sentiment, more language to use. And so that's one reason that we've always positioned ourselves as a resource for creative people, as much as anything else. I'm so much more interested in that than commerce, just because it's important to keep those things moving forward.
Great questions and comments, everyone. Thank you so much.
I mean, it's still a little bit like, I guess I'm talking at people, but yeah, I'm trying to, to share some of the things that I know and think, and hopefully maybe there's someone else that's listening and lurking that is like, oh, I am going to write that book down. I hope some people buy some books from Side Reel Press tonight.
Yes.
You mentioned, Sean just said, I remember a panel from Arkham Asylum had a tiny inscription saying it was dedicated to Fritz Shoulder. Never would have pegged him as an influence on Dave. Is that the artist that just passed away?
Not familiar with Fritz Shoulder.
Because I don't remember the name, but I know there's an artist that, I don't know if it was Arkham Asylum or if it was in Cages, that Dave had done a thing. But there's a lot of artists that, another really big one is Beksinski. But if Fritz Shoulder is who I think it is, I know when people started posting images on my social media saying that he had just passed, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, Dave McKean has to be a fan of this man. And sure enough, yeah, they had been very friendly. And oh no, so who's the guy that, an indigenous neo expressionist who was part of the Indian power movement? I mean, I can't imagine the laundry list of artists that Dave is inspired by that I don't know. He's got an amazing collection, and he's one of the best artists I've ever seen, and a very, very, very smart man. And so, just incredibly educated. So I'll look him up. Fritz Shoulder. I don't know his work, and I wish I could remember the name of this other artist, but I can't. There's someone who had just passed, and he had done something. I think it was maybe it was in Signal to Noise, but where he had done a little thing where there was a dedication to this person, 20 something years ago, and it circulated a lot online this past week when this artist passed. It was a bad week for the arts, bad month. A lot of people.
Yeah.
Howie Pyro passed away yesterday. Neil Adams a few days ago. Lots of people. My friend Mario. So yeah, weird week. But and Dave's a really good example of. I think Peter Gabriel said that art is the craft of clever thievery, and Dave, Bill Sienkiewicz are both people that have very deep wells of influence that a lot of people who love their work don't realize how sophisticated their taste is getting inadvertently, because then you'll see this work that looks like their work, and you're, all of a sudden you're looking at, fantastic art from Austria from the 1970s or
an artist
expressionists. What were you going to say? Sorry.
One artist I had a similar experience with was Esteban Maroto.
In what way?
When I was first becoming familiar with his work, I just remember feeling a sense that this art is perfect. Like there's a perfect, and I don't know if it's a geometry thing, but there's something so fundamentally good about his hand and his sensitivity to everything, from the faces to the volume of the hair to his palettes. And I mean, that just could be my personal opinion on it and how it suits my taste, but there's a thread between Mucha and Esteban Maroto, in my opinion. and he just has such a richness to his work.
Well, he's another one that, he's very educated,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly talented. I mean, definitely one of my favorite artists.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that has a lot to do with growing up in Spain, in Barcelona, like American architecture and culture took so many weird zigzags. And I think he just, being there, was exposed to so much more Art Nouveau. And also, too, when you get into the offshoots like the German Art Nouveau or Spanish Art Nouveau, it's really powerful and really strong. And you do see that in his work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take what you said a step further and say, I became a fan of Art Nouveau, not because I knew what Art Nouveau was, but because I loved Esteban Maroto. I loved his work as a kid. I loved it so much. And then when I started seeing Art Nouveau, I was like, what is this stuff that looks like Esteban Maroto? So I was becoming highly sophisticated in my taste without knowing anything I was looking at. And so, yeah, he was totally my entree into appreciating Art Nouveau, like probably more than any other artist. I mean, maybe Michael Kaluta would be in there. Probably those two, Esteban Maroto and Michael Kaluta, are probably the two that I saw when I was young. And then someone's asking about the Grand Guignol book being a poster book or academic info. It'll be more academic. When we do the books that are just kind of the poster books, it's when there's not a lot to say. I don't know if you've read the Alphonse Mucha La Pater book that we did. But that's probably closer to what I'm envisioning, just in the sense of, I have artifacts from the theater, like letterhead from the directors of the theater and stuff like that, and photos. And I think that the posters are interesting and powerful and beautiful. But I think the thing that's most important is the cultural significance of this kind of theater at that time in history. Okay, waiting for the paperback. Sorry. They're I think they're only like 65% shipped. But yeah, so when you get Le Pater, that's kind of where I'm envisioning going. Part of that might change because one of the challenges that I'm having is that there's so many things that surrounded it that I think are really interesting. Like in my own head, there's a really clear line between the Grand Guignol and the Weimar Cabaret. And I just can't figure out if those need to be two completely separate books or if I should be making that thread of that 20-year arc. I'm leaning toward connecting it, but if I had it figured out, I would be sitting down to write it. So yeah, I don't know yet, but yes, definitely academic. I'm a big fan of Mel Gordon, and he was very generous with information with me, and I liked him a lot. And I really loved Voluptuous Panic, and I liked his Grand Guignol book. The thing that was lacking to me is that I feel like such an important part of that theater are the visuals. And because they were stage plays, we don't have like movie stills or anything. There aren't even really good photos. And so the posters to me are what really capture the morbid, it's like a morbid sexuality. And so it'll be very image heavy, but it'll be kind of like the Le Pater book in the sense of lots of text and even bigger pictures. And we only have 5 minutes left.
Well, I have a question for you.
I have an answer.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. So I really love a different avenue of theater. And I know that I've been spending a lot of time researching it, and there are just so many rabbit holes. But I wanted to know, what about the Grand Guignol Theater caught your attention? Like, what part of that did you fall in love with? Keeping in mind that you do have a huge Grand Guignol collection and you have spent so much time researching it.
I think it's that I like the idea of horror, but I very, very, very rarely like the execution. And I think that the idea is that there's a very banal lack of sophistication in 99.9% of things that I'm finding that I see, like, cinematically.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and here's Elias Marriage. Speaking of good horror people, I know he hates being a horror guy. And so I think what I was seeing in the Grand Guignol was that there was such an elevated sense of aesthetic that it appealed to the part of me that had a more mature artistic sensibility, but it also was it found a way to be disturbing and elegant at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think, I mean, maybe Pan's Labyrinth, like, it's just so rare that happens. And every horror person that says, oh, I love the Grand Guignol, I just feel like what the Grand Guignol probably really was is vastly overblown in my head. Like, I think that my sense of romance attached to it is looking at it through the lens of the Belle Epoque Parisian culture and the really great artists that were working on the posters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like maybe if you hear a band that they were just trying to have beer or drink beer and have fun, but you listen to them 20 years later and you're like, yeah, but you were a great rock band.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like what they succeeded in doing is most valuable conceptually. And so it's kind of like when people talk about, or like when someone asked earlier, like a story being made into, or we talked about adaptations of books. I don't know that recreating the plays works for I totally lost my thought because now I know Aaron is here too. I would have asked you all kinds of questions, Aaron. What was I saying?
Can I interrupt you because I have a question?
Let me say this. I wasn't trying to be negative about the Grand Guignol, except that I feel like the biggest value and the thing that I was attracted to is a conceptual thing that in 2022 would have to be so different. So a big part of my interest in the book, or in a book about them, is finding a way to convey that and not necessarily just be like a sterile analysis of, oh, here's the plays they did and here's why, but why is it so romantic and sexy and why is it so stimulating in a really elegant way? But I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I wonder how much of the concept behind something like the Grand Guignol is the mythologizing of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's 60 seconds left, and that's a big that's a big topic to get the romance of eye gouging. But yeah, I mean, I think that movies like Saw are probably pretty spot on for what the Grand Guignol was. I guess
Mhm.
my point is that what that was in 1897 is different than 2020. The reason the theater closed was that the director said, we can't compete with the horrors of the Second World War. So after World War II, they closed. I guess that's what I mean, is that
Jeez, yeah.
What it was in 1897 was something that the world had just never seen marketed as. Also, that's I'm getting it. There's all these tangents converging. I'll say this and then I'll stop. You also had, after the Industrial Revolution, a middle class for the first time. And so you had people that would put on nice clothes and go out to the theater on a date night in a way that didn't exist 50 years earlier. So even though there are precursors in, theater, Shakespeare, any of that kind of stuff, the fact that it got escalated to where it did, the fact that it was able to be absorbed by the public in a way that it was, it's kind of like saying, it's a comparing Aristide Bruant to John Lennon. Like, Aristide Bruant might have been massively important, but he existed at a time where no one was making records, so like it couldn't spread.
I have had similar thoughts about the Theater de Funambule, where
as most people do.
Yes.
Catherine.
Well, that's where Pierrot, as we know him, in.
All right, if we start talking about Perot, we're going to be here till 8:00. So let's do this. It's we're supposed to stop at 7. But yeah, maybe next time we could just talk about some of the Grand Guignol stuff and just kind of pick this up. So first of all, thank you to everybody who was here tonight. Across the next few months, there's going to be lots of things that we're going to be adapting as we kind of get like our company stuff up to the next level. And then the other thing is, I think that the next one will probably be a little off like this too. So, if you've been listening and don't have any questions, maybe come armed with some or things like that. Is there anything else that you want to say, Kat?
No.
No.
Thank you all so much for being a part of this. I really appreciated everybody's observations and questions. And yeah, next month we'll be here first Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. Pacific. And if you're interested in any of the books, I will, after the fact, I will link them in the description that Tom mentioned. And then if you want to check out our books, they're at centuryguild.net.
And also, too, if anybody is of a mind to do so, if I understand everybody has, like, there's a lot of people with pseudonyms and stuff. Like, if any of you are kind of known to us or anything, or if you want to message us with who you are, it kind of helps a little bit, just because, when I see Count Orlok 22, that has been Sean's handle for over 10 years, 15 years, so like I know who some people are. So if you're willing to reveal yourselves to us, but you want to keep your secret YouTube pseudonym, just send us a message and tell us who you are. It's because we really appreciate you being here and really are hoping that we can be building this just as a community. Like, this is I learn as much from people telling me about things, and I'm just trying to pay some of that back. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thank you guys so much. And we'll see you first Thursday of every month. We'll see you in 30 days.
Bye, everyone.